who can destroy a thing has the real control of it.
Welcome to Dave's Take. Today we are talking about Dune Part 2, one of the most anticipated films of the year. Paul Atreides unites with Chani and the Firmin while seeking revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family. Expectations for this film were absolutely enormous. If you remember when the first Dune movie came out in 2021, the studio didn't even greenlight Part 2 unless Part 1 did well. Part 1 did well, now we have Part 2, so this film had a lot to live up to. And it's not just because of that. Dune is very important to a lot of people. It's one of the most celebrated novels of all time. And with how great Part 1 was and all these other expectations, Part 2 had so much to live up to. I'm just going to get right into it and say Dune Part 2 is a spectacular, monumental achievement. It is one of the best science fiction films I've ever seen. This is an experience I'm never going to forget. It truly has this epic feeling to it, this ginormous scale, and I think everyone here does a perfect job. Denis Villeneuve has already made so many projects that have established him as one of the all-time great directors, but there are people out there that still doubt him. After they see Dune Part 2, they better shut the fuck up. Because this is one of the best looking films I've ever seen. It's not just because of the spectacular special effects where everything feels so grand in scale and everything just looks perfect. And that's part of it, but it's because every single shot here feels like it's so thought out, put so much care into it with the cinematography, where characters are, the colors, the effects. Everything looks flawless. I don't know how they could do it any better. And then you combine that with an insane sound design, some of the best I've ever heard when it comes to the story in this world. And then you combine that with Hans Zimmer's score, which is absolutely amazing. If you thought his score in Part 1 was really well done, he somehow makes an even better score here. Which, I gotta say, is a funny trend I see. You could see a film that's absolutely terrible, but if you see Hans Zimmer scored it, you'll be like, well, that movie was dog shit. But that score, though, pretty good. Hans Zimmer always brings his A game no matter what he does. And with Dune Part 2, this is one of the best scores he's ever composed, and that is really saying something. The technical aspects of this film are truly masterful. I can't say anything more about them. It really feels like you're sucked into this epic story, and you're here to experience it. And part of that feeling for that larger-than-life experience is because of this story. This story is absolutely magnificent. I have to preference, after I saw Part 1, I was so excited for Part 2. I read the book for the very first time, and of course the book is spectacular, so I was curious to see how they would adapt some things into Part 2. And I'm happy to say, as a fan of the book, I feel like they adapted this story perfectly. There's some things they change, there's some things they leave out, but I think it's really smartly done, and I think this is one of the best science fiction adaptations I've ever seen. You can really tell the filmmakers here understand the source material, they understand the story, what it's trying to say about this world, certain characters, the overall message, and they absolutely nail it. It's a powerful and memorable story about our perception of leaders and faith, and I won't go into it too much because if you haven't read the book, I don't want to spoil anything, but I just gotta say, I think this film absolutely nails what the source material is trying to say. But I do think all the other aspects of this overall story is just extremely interesting with the world, the lore, and these characters, and some of the moments that we have with them. And speaking of characters, I gotta talk about performances now because I think they're absolutely spectacular. You can tell everyone here knew they were making something timeless, and they wanted to bring their A game, and they absolutely did. Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides is perfect. If I would have read the book before I saw the first film, they announced that he was playing Paul Atreides, I'd be going insane because I'd be like, wow, that is literally fucking perfect. But he gives an absolutely great performance here. It's one of those performances where you're like, oh, this is where Paul was at the beginning of Part 1, and then you see him at the end of Part 2, and you're like, those are completely two different people. I also thought Zendaya as Chani was great. She has way more screen time here than she did in Part 1, and she absolutely does a great job. I also really liked Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica again. There's a lot of great things she did in Part 1, but in Part 2, there's a lot of different things she needs to do. And I think she absolutely crushes it. But I gotta say, one of my favorite performances in the film was Austin Butler. He does a fucking great job here. His character is so brutal and harsh, and he absolutely nails it. And anytime he's on screen, it was just a lot of fun to watch. I'm also happy to say, at the end of my Part 1 review, I was really concerned that this movie wouldn't be made. And it really kind of hindered how I thought about part one, because that would have been really awkward if this film never got made and we just had part one. But now that part two got made, it turned out as well as it did. I think this will be considered the Dune adaptation, and this will be one of the greatest science fiction stories ever to be put on screen. I'm sitting here now reflecting on the film, and it just hasn't left my mind. I can't stop thinking about how every aspect of filmmaking here, when it comes to directing, the performances, the effects, the storytelling, just feels elevated from what we typically see. Everything about this film just feels smart. It feels like it's in a different class of quality compared to other science fiction films. I love the way the film ends. Just like when I finished the book, it's an ending that's going to stick with me, and it's going to stick with everyone for a long time. I can't give enough praise for Dune Part 2. There's nothing about this film I would change. This film just has such an epic experience feeling to it, like a Lord of the Rings or anything in that grand a scale. It feels like every aspect here was just so thought out. They're like, how are we going to make every little detail here perfect? And that's what it feels like. It truly feels like we got something special here. As an adaptation to the novel, I think it's perfect. As a film, I think this is one of the best science fiction films I have ever seen. I'm going to give Dune Part 2 10 Davey Daves.
It's over! It's over!
If you didn't like Dune Part 1, I don't think Dune Part 2 is going to win you over. I think you'll enjoy it more than Part 1, but if you're expecting some action-packed science fiction film, this is definitely not it. It's more of a slow burn. It's about the story, the lore, the world, the characters, and for me, that's just perfect. So, Dune Part 2. Let me know what you guys thought of it once you've seen it. I'm curious to hear, and thank you so much for watching. Click here to see more of Dave's Takes.